The day my daughter called me crying from the parking lot of her own graduation, I was sitting in a cafe in Lisbon eating a pastel de nata and watching pigeons fight over a bread crust. It was 7 in the morning there. Back home in Charlotte, it was 2 in the afternoon. She had just watched the man her mother married stand up in front of 400 people and take credit for raising her. I want to go back. I need to go back a few years so you understand how I ended up on that side of the Atlantic and why I wasn't sitting in the front row of that auditorium the way I should have been. Her name is Jade. She was 24 when she graduated with her master's degree in public health from UNC Chapel Hill. She is the best thing I have ever done with my life. I want you to understand that before I say anything else. My name is not important. People around here just call me Uncle Russell. But this is my story and I'm going to tell it the way it happened. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer. I built bridges, literally, not the metaphorical kind people talk about in speeches, real ones. Steel and concrete over rivers and highways. I was good at it. I had retired at 62 with a pension, a 401k that I had been feeding since I was 29, and what I believed was a solid marriage to a woman I had known since college. Her name was Corinne. We met at Howard University in 1984. She was studying business administration. I was studying civil engineering. We were married in 1989. For a long time it was good. Not perfect, but good. We built something together. We bought a house in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte in 1997 for $212,000. We raised Jade there. We had a dog named Chester who lived to be 14. We had a life. When I retired, I thought we were moving into the next chapter together. I had about $480,000 in retirement savings. We had about $260,000 in equity in the house. Our monthly expenses were around $4,000. We had room. We had time. I thought we were going to travel, breathe, finally slow down. What I did not know was that for the previous 2 years, Corinne had been seeing a man named Preston. I found out the way. A lot of men find out. Not from a confrontation, not from a tearful confession. I found out from a credit card statement I wasn't supposed to see. She had opened a second card in both our names without telling me. There was $11,000 on it. Hotel stays in Raleigh. Dinners at restaurants I had never been to. A weekend at a resort in Asheville. When I asked her about it, she did not deny it. She said she had been unhappy for a long time. She said she felt like she had been invisible in our marriage. She said Preston understood her in ways I never had. She said a lot of things that night that I am not going to repeat here, because some of them still land hard, even now. We separated in October. The divorce was finalized the following June. It was civil, as divorces go. We agreed to sell the house and split the equity. We agreed to separate our retirement accounts. I kept my pension. She kept a portion of the 401k that covered her contributions over the years. The lawyers handled most of it. I was too tired to fight. What I didn't know until much later was what happened with the house. We agreed to list it at $440,000. The market had been good to us. Corinne was supposed to handle the listing because I had already started the process of figuring out where I was going next. I had signed off on the listing agreement, trusted that the proceeds would be split per the divorce decree, and started looking at a very different kind of life. I want to tell you about that. About why I left. After the divorce, I spent about 3 months in Charlotte feeling like a ghost in my own city. I would drive past the house on Dilworth Road and it would feel like a punch in the chest every time. I would run into people we knew together and watch them try to figure out what to say to me. I was 63 years old, retired, and felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Jade was living in Chapel Hill, finishing her graduate program. We talked on the phone a few times a week. She was kind to me, but she was also navigating her own feelings about all of it, and I tried not to make her carry mine. A former colleague of mine, a man named George, who had retired 2 years before me, had moved to Portugal. He kept sending me photographs. Narrow streets, tiles on the walls of buildings, the Douro River at sunset. One afternoon he called me and said, "Just come visit. 2 weeks. See what you think." I booked a flight for March. I told myself it was just a visit. I never really came back. Porto was not what I expected. I expected to feel like a tourist. Instead, I felt something I had not felt in years, which was anonymous in the best possible way. Nobody knew me. Nobody knew what my marriage had been. Nobody looked at me with that particular expression of pity mixed with curiosity that I had been getting in Charlotte for months. The weather in March was cool and grey, and I loved it. The food cost almost nothing compared to what I was used to. I found an apartment in the Bonfim neighborhood for €900 a month. The whole month. My pension and savings threw off enough that I could live there comfortably on about $1,900 a month and still save. I extended my 2 weeks to 2 months. Then I signed a lease. I told Jade on a Sunday afternoon phone call. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dad, are you sure?" And I said yes, and she said, "Okay, I'm going to come visit." And I said good, because I meant it. She visited that August. She stayed for 12 days. She walked those narrow streets with me, ate grilled fish at the restaurants by the river, learned 5 words of Portuguese and used them relentlessly on every shopkeeper she encountered. On her last night, she told me she was glad I had found something that made me look like myself again. She said she had been worried about me. I did not know then what was happening back home. Corinne had been with Preston for about a year by that point. He was a financial consultant. He drove a leased BMW. He had an office in a high-rise in uptown Charlotte, with his name on the door. He took Corinne to Napa for a weekend in September. He gave the impression of a man who had everything figured out. In October, Jade called me to tell me that her mother and Preston were engaged. I want to be honest about what I felt when I heard that. I felt a clench in my chest that I would not call grief exactly. It was something more like the confirmation of a door finally closing. It was not shock. It was not rage. It was something quieter and heavier than either of those things. I said, "I hope she's happy." Jade said, "I don't know how I feel about it, Dad." I said, "You don't have to decide today." What came next, I was not prepared for. About 3 weeks after the engagement announcement, Jade called me and her tone was different. She said, "Mom wants me to know that Preston is going to walk me down the aisle someday. She said she wants him to be part of my milestones." I was quiet. Jade said she also said that Preston is going to be at my graduation. She wants him to be acknowledged as someone who helped support me. I said, "Did he?" Jade was quiet. Then she said, "He paid for my last semester. Mom asked him to. She said you two had already divided finances and she didn't want to ask you." I had not been asked. I did not know. I had told Jade I would cover whatever she needed for her last year. She had told me her mother said it was handled. I had assumed Corinne was using her portion of our shared assets. I did not know it had come from Preston. That realization sat with me for a long time. I understand now that this is where Jade started to see Preston not as a replacement, but as a provider, and I understand why. She was 23 in graduate school, and the man was paying her bills. I am not naive about how that works, but there was something that stung about not being asked, about being quietly removed from that role without a conversation. I told Jade that I was proud of her, that her graduation was hers, and that whoever was in that auditorium did not change what we had built together. She said she knew, but something in her voice told me she was carrying more than she was saying. The wedding was in April, about 8 months after the engagement. Charlotte, a venue in the South End. Jade told me about it, but I was not invited, which was appropriate, and I expected that. I found out the details, the way you find out things you're not supposed to know, which is through a mutual friend named Gerard who sent me a text message that said only, "Heard it was a big production." I sent back a thumbs up and went back to my coffee. What I did not expect was what happened at the reception. I heard about it from Jade about a week after the wedding. She called me on a Saturday morning, my time, which was afternoon for her, and I could tell from the first word that something had shifted. She said, "Dad, I need to tell you something about the wedding." I said, "Okay." She said Preston gave a speech. He talked about Corinne, about their life together, about building something new, and then he talked about me. He said I was a symbol of the new chapter they were starting together. He called himself my other dad. I did not say anything. She said, and then one of Mom's cousins, Aunt Vera. She stood up during the open toast portion and she said, With all due respect to this beautiful occasion, I want to make sure we all remember who raised this young woman, because she is remarkable, and that didn't happen by accident." The room, Jade told me, went completely still. Corinne did not respond to it. Preston laughed it off. But Jade said she watched her mother's face change in a way she had not seen before. Something flickered there, something between embarrassment and recognition. Later that night, Jade told me she found her mother sitting alone on a bench in the venue's courtyard. Preston was inside accepting congratulations. Corinne had a glass of wine in her hand and she was staring at something in the middle distance. Jade sat down next to her. They didn't say much, but before Jade went back inside, Corinne said, "Your father built a good life for us. I need you to know I know that." Jade said she didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. She just squeezed her mother's hand and went back to the party. She told me all of this on that Saturday phone call, and when she finished, she was crying. Not from sadness exactly, from something more complicated. From that feeling you get when you realize that adults you love are just people with limitations and blind spots and regrets they carry quietly. I was in my kitchen in Porto making eggs when she called. I put down the spatula. I sat down at the table. I said, "Jade, I need you to hear me. What Aunt Vera said was true. But your graduation from that program, your career, who you are, that is yours. You built that. Your mother and I both had a hand in it, and I am grateful for every part I got to play. You don't owe anybody a story that's simpler than the real one." She said, "I know, Dad." I said, "Do you?" She said, "I'm starting to. There is something I haven't told you yet. About the house." About 2 months after the wedding, I received a letter from an attorney in Charlotte. It was regarding the final settlement of the sale of the Dilworth house. The house had sold, according to this letter, for $485,000. Not $440,000. The listing had been quietly adjusted upward and the sale had closed 8 months prior. Per the divorce decree, I was owed half of the net proceeds. I had received a check for $106,000 at the time of the sale, which was based on a stated sale price of $250,000 after accounting for the mortgage balance and closing costs. The math did not match. I called a lawyer. She was a woman in Charlotte named Patricia that a friend had recommended, and she was very calm and very clear when I explained the situation. She said the discrepancy in the sale price, if verified, could constitute a violation of the divorce decree and potentially fraud. She asked me to send her everything I had. I sent her everything. What she found over the following 6 weeks was a paper trail that told a very clear story. The house had sold for $485,000. The closing costs and remaining mortgage balance totaled approximately $62,000. The net proceeds were $423,000. My half should have been $211,500. I had received $106,000. The difference was $105,000. Patricia filed a motion. The process was slow and uncomfortable and required a deposition from Corinne, which I did not attend but received the transcript of. In the deposition, Corinne said she had believed the figures were correct and that her real estate attorney had handled the disbursement. The real estate attorney produced documentation that told a different story. I am not going to describe the legal process in detail because it was painful and tedious, and I spent a significant portion of it trying to remain calm in a cafe in Porto with bad Wi-Fi, while Patricia sent me updates via email. What I will tell you is that it was resolved. I received the remaining amount plus interest, plus legal fees. Corinne paid it from the joint investment account she and Preston had established together. That is when things got complicated for Preston. Because the money came from their joint account, it required Preston's signature, which required Preston to explain to Corinne why the account balance was lower than she had been led to believe, which led to a conversation between them that I only know about secondhand. To Jade, who heard parts of it and related to me with the particular exhaustion of a child who has watched adults fail each other for too long. What Jade told me was this: Preston had been representing himself as significantly more successful than he was. The high-rise office was subleased, not owned. The BMW was not the only lease. The furniture in his apartment had been leased. The financial consulting practice had 3 clients. 2 of them were family members. The money he had used to pay for Jade's last semester of graduate school had come from a line of credit he had taken out against his own name, which he had not disclosed to Corinne and which was coming due. He was not broke, but he was, as Jade put it with a precision I admired, performing a life he couldn't actually afford. By the time all of this came to light, they had been married about 5 months. I did not feel satisfied when Jade told me this. I want to be honest about that. I had thought I might. I had thought there would be some moment of clean vindication. Instead, I felt tired. I felt sad for Corinne in a way I hadn't expected, because whatever her failures had been in our marriage, she did not deserve to find herself in that position. And I felt something for Jade that was harder to name. A wish that she had not had to be the one relaying all of this between her parents like a translator between two people speaking languages. Neither of them fully understood anymore. Jade graduated on a Saturday in May. The ceremony was outdoors on the main quad at Chapel Hill. It was warm, probably about 78 degrees. The kind of Carolina spring day that makes you understand why people stay in the South their whole lives. I was there. I had booked my flight 2 months earlier. The day she called me after the wedding, I had told no one except her. She had been happy, and then she had started crying on the phone, and she said, "I didn't know if you were coming." And I said, "Jade, I'm your father. Where else will I be?" I sat in the third row. When they called her name, I stood up before anyone else did. I clapped so hard my palms hurt. After the ceremony, we walked to a restaurant near campus that she had picked out. Just the two of us. We sat outside under a string of lights and ate shrimp and grits, and she kept her graduation cap on the whole time because she said she had waited 5 years to wear it, and she was not taking it off until she was ready. She told me about everything that had happened with her mother and Preston, not in a rush, not with bitterness, just as a story that she was still trying to make sense of. She said she had been angry at me for a while after I moved away, even though she hadn't said it. She said it had felt like I was choosing my own healing over being present for her. She said she understood it differently now, but she wanted me to know that it had hurt. I said, "I know. I should have said that out loud more. That I knew it was hard on you. I'm sorry." She said, "I don't need an apology. I just needed to say it." I said, "I know, but you have it anyway." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Porto seems like it really suits you." I said, "It does, but this suits me more." I pointed at the table, the food, the lights, her ridiculous graduation cap. She laughed. The first real one of the night. We talked about her plans. She had accepted a position with a non-profit in Washington, D.C., working on health equity policy. She was moving in 3 weeks. She was terrified and ready in equal measure. I told her that was exactly how it was supposed to feel. We split a piece of coconut cake for dessert, because it was a celebration and because life is short, and because she had earned it. Walking back to the car, she took my arm the way she used to when she was small. She said, "I'm going to come see you in Porto in the fall." I said, "I'll make sure the guest room is ready." She said, "And Dad, I'm proud of you. For leaving. For not just sitting in Charlotte and getting smaller. I was scared for you for a while, but I think it was the right thing." I did not trust my voice right away, so I waited a moment before I answered. I said, "I think so too, but I didn't do it right. I should have stayed closer while I was finding myself." She squeezed my arm. She said, "You're here now." I flew back to Porto 2 days later. I had a window seat. The sun was coming up as we left the East Coast, and I watched the water stretch out below, and I thought about all the things I had built in my life. The bridges were still standing. The hard parts of the marriage had left marks, but they had not leveled me. The money that was taken from me had been returned. My daughter was walking out into the world wearing her own name. Some things that get taken from you do come back. Not all of them. Not always in the form you expect, but some of them do. I'm 64 years old. I live in an apartment in Bonfim with a view of rooftops and a cat that belongs to my neighbor but has decided she prefers my kitchen. I have a group of friends who meet on Thursday evenings at a restaurant near the river to eat well and argue about nothing important. I walk 4 miles every morning. I call Jade every Sunday. There is a question I get sometimes from people who hear pieces of this story. They ask, do I regret the marriage? Do I regret the years? And the answer is no. Because you cannot separate the life you built from the love that drove it. And you cannot regret the love without regretting the child. And I will not do that. Not for anything. But there is one thing I have learned that I want to say clearly, because I think it matters. Presence is not the same thing as proximity. I was in the same house as my wife for 31 years, and there were long stretches where I was not truly present. I was working, I was planning, I was thinking about the next project, the next milestone, the next bridge. I confused providing with connecting, and that confusion cost me something real. I am not saying the divorce was my fault. It was not only my fault. There were two people in that marriage, and both of us let things go unspoken for too long. But I am 64 years old, and I have enough time behind me now to say without embarrassment, pay attention to the people in front of you. Not when it's convenient, not after the project closes. Now, today, tonight at dinner, this weekend, before the distance between you becomes the kind that doesn't close just because you decide you're ready. I learned that lesson later than I should have. But I learned it, and I got to walk into that auditorium in Chapel Hill on a warm Saturday in May and watch my daughter cross a stage. And she looked up and found my face in the crowd, and she smiled, and that was enough. That was enough. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the courtroom stuff, not the spreadsheet my lawyer sent me with the numbers that didn't add up. I keep coming back to Jade sitting across from me at that restaurant in Chapel Hill with her graduation cap still on her head, telling me that I had hurt her by leaving. Not accusing me, just saying it plainly the way someone says something they've been holding for a long time and finally decided to put down. That's the thing about living with integrity. And I mean that word in the engineering sense as much as anything else. The way a structure either holds its load or it doesn't. You can do the right thing in broad strokes and still leave damage in the details. I provided for 31 years. I showed up to every recital, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that had a date on the calendar. But presence isn't the same as attention, and I confused them for a long time. That confusion had consequences, not punishment handed down from somewhere. Just the natural result of what I chose to spend my energy on and what I didn't. Preston was a lesson in a different kind of cost. He built the appearance of a life without building the foundation under it. Leased office, leased car, borrowed money presented as generosity. For a while it worked. It worked well enough that my own daughter started measuring me against him. That is not her fault. She was responding to what she could see, and what she could see was a man who seemed to have everything figured out. What she couldn't see yet was the difference between someone who had built something real over 30 years and someone who had financed the impression of it. The truth has a way of clarifying things, eventually. Not dramatically, not with any particular sense of timing, just steadily, the way a tide comes in. The numbers on the house sale didn't match. The account balance didn't add up. The office that looked impressive turned out to be subleased. These things reveal themselves, not because life is just in some tidy philosophical sense, but because unsupported structures eventually show their cracks. I was an engineer for 31 years. I know exactly what happens when the math is wrong from the beginning. What I'm most proud of is not that I found out or that I was made financially whole again. What I'm most proud of is that Jade had the clarity of mind to sit across from me and tell me a hard truth about how my choices had affected her. And the strength of character not to let that truth become permanent bitterness. She didn't stay angry. She didn't pretend everything was fine either. She held both things at once, the hurt and the love, and she walked forward anyway. That takes something that no amount of money produces. It takes the kind of quiet toughness that gets built through years of watching adults be human and choosing not to be destroyed by it. I learned late, but I learned, pay attention now. Not eventually. Not when it's convenient. The people in front of you are the only project that actually matters. And unlike a bridge, you don't get an inspection period after the fact. You get the time you spend, and then you get whatever that time was worth. Jade called me last Sunday from her apartment in DC. She said the new job was hard and good at the same time. I said that sounded about right. She laughed. We talked for an hour about nothing important and everything that mattered. That's the whole story. That's all of it.